Hello. Before we begin this latest episode, it has been inspired by the work of charitable organisation Film is Fabulous. I'm a supporter of Film is Fabulous because they need assistance for their mission to save vulnerable film collections. Now, you can donate to Film is Fabulous as a one-off, and that's hugely appreciated, but the best way to support their ongoing work is to set up a regular payment. As a regular supporter, you will receive invitations to their events so that you can see some of the rare and missing items they recover, exclusive podcasts and videos with insight, interviews and progress reports, Q&A opportunities, regular updates on Film is Fabulous activities, and even, possibly, merchandise. I don't know, you could have something like saying, I went to a film fair and all I came back with was this crappy t-shirt and a copy of Fury from the Deep, Episode 6. To learn more and become a regular supporter of Film is Fabulous, please email donate@filmisfabulous.org.uk. Welcome to Indefinable Magic. Fanciful imaginings about something here today, gone tomorrow, but sometimes here tomorrow and going to yesterday. The TV series Doctor Who. This week's episode, Fantasy Film Cans. Written and presented by me, Toby Hadoke. People spend all their time making nice things, and other people come along and break them. It's my favourite game to play. Is it yours? I bet it is. I'm at a car boot sale, and there's an old man with a stall of bric-a-brac, and behind him is a pile of film cans. The number differs depending on how generous I'm feeling, and once I've fixed upon that, I have a choice. What are the episodes? Sometimes I add details for verisimilitude. There's also some Z-cars there, or some non-missing episodes, or one's missing but it's a bit damaged. Just so I don't feel like my imagination is taking me to a world of unicorns and sunshine and compliant Gillian Andersons. It's just how my mind works. When I fantasize about winning an Oscar, I worry about how I'd get to the ceremony, where I'd stay, and who'd look after my dog. In fact, such a dullard am I that I even have to think about the feasibility of transporting these imaginary car boot episodes back before other, less generously minded episode hunters come along and secure them for their own Parisian cellar, where they keep them as an expensive gloat. My psychiatrist would have a field day with the fact that even my fantasy world has practical considerations to overcome and already built-in difficulties and resentments. It's like conjuring up a mental threesome with two of the most beautiful women in the world, but besetting it with the shortcomings that one of the contributors is in a hurry and the other hasn't brushed her teeth. Anyway, my fantasies are generally confined to the projection room, not the bedroom. In all honesty, I think I'd probably bring a board game to an orgy. And because there is much missing episode hoopla in the air, thanks to the latest Film is Fabulous announcement that they believe some Doctor Who exists in private hands, I decided to canvass some friends about which episodes they'd like back in an ideal world, using the fantasy car boot sale scenario as a basis, and giving them 17 episodes to play with and conjure. 17 pages of the Dead Sea Scrolls to rescue before the rest are washed away forever. But, before we get into the mechanics of the game, a few definitive statements as to what this podcast isn't. This is no indication, clue, or suggestion of anything that is actually happening. It is pure fantasy. A parlour game turned into a podcast. Like you, I know nothing about what Film is Fabulous have discovered. Full disclosure, I spoke to John Franklin, Film is Fabulous's founder, last week because he asked for my assistance should anything media-related be required of me on their behalf. And although my inner voice was yelling, "Ask him which episodes he knows about," almost as loudly as it, in other circumstances, might opine, Couldn't you have flossed, Gillian Anderson? Elizabeth Hurley has a train to catch. I decided to remain professional, even though I don't actually get paid for this sort of thing, and resign myself to the fact that when he has something he can tell me, and indeed that he wants to tell the likes of me, he will. So, first up, nothing herein is a tantalising hint, a snide morsel proffered by someone in the know, lording it up over mere mortals. That's not my style. But in the world of Doctor Who discourse, it's sadly unavoidable. It's a bit like in The Traitors when someone says something innocuous like, "Oh, I could murder a hamburger," and some idiot decides that because they've used the word murder in a totally unrelated context, then they are undoubtedly one of the traitors. And no, that's not me keeping on mentioning the traitors in a way to subtly suggest that episode 4 of the Daleks' master plan is winging its way back to TV Centre. See? You're doing it already! I would not be flinging in an episode title undercover in order to give away private information that I don't know anyway. That would be a twatty thing to do, and would suggest I had hidden knowledge in some kind of temple of secrets of mine or something. But I haven't. So, nothing herein is innuendo as to what may be out there. I honestly have no idea, and if I have my suspicions, well, I'm not going to render them here in code for the imaginatively feverish, like the condensation trails of high-flying aircraft spelling out that we're ruled by a new world order of lizards in a code that can only be picked up by the most perceptive awkward men living in basements. If you do want to digest every morsel of information about what might be happening in this most recent film collecting initiative, then listen to, and only listen to, Tim Burrow's excellent The Missing Episodes podcast, specifically the episode which is a conversation with John Franklin and his fellow fabulous filmers Sue Malden and Professor Justin Smith. That's where everything that needs to be known and is currently fit for public disclosure resides. Oh, Doctor Who fan BBC guy and episode finder Paul Venezes has said a few things publicly too, but this also gets covered in the Missing Episodes podcast. And Paul said things to me privately in a car. We worked together. But what he said to me in the car is exactly what he said publicly. So that's pretty much all that is out there. Some episodes, private hands, we need to get to them. Well, more exactly, Film is Fabulous need to get to them, and we need to stop bothering them while they're doing so. Oh, and one of the things that John Franklin mentioned in Tim Burrow's podcast, he also emphasised to me. He was slightly alarmed at the tenor of the messages he'd received from a minority of fans. It's always a minority, but it's always fans. Sending threats of death or violence, demanding information, and turning up at De Montfort University, insisting upon access to film cans, is not acceptable behaviour, and it's certainly not useful. Now, I doubt anyone who listens to this podcast is doing that sort of thing, but it's an indication of why information is scant right now and how delicate this sort of thing is. Oh, and of course, it's also an indication that some people are arseholes. Why do Doctor Who fans have such a bad reputation? Says man who has just sent hate mail to a film collector. Sigh. So, instead of hassling the hard-working or trying to tabloid up a bit of information that's already out there thanks to a well-presented broadcast that lays everything out maturely, I thought it'd be fun to wait out the time between now and hopefully the not-too-distant future when something comes back. Oh, imagine! By indulging in ridiculous speculation. Move over, Gillian and Elizabeth. I've got 17 film cans to lay out on the bed. Oh, and Gillian, use the time to break out the Listerine. But why 17? Do I know something? Does that number 17 have significance, like the symbols hidden on a banknote? Nope. I chose the number 17 because, well, I initially chose 11, and it seemed like too few when I thought about it. But then anything over 20 seemed like a pipe dream. An impossible Shangri-La where the nocturnal triumvirates have all the time in the world and its glamorous participants all have perfect dental hygiene. So, here's the pitch I sent out to people. I'm at a car boot sale, and look, there's a stall with 17 film cans. They are all Doctor Who, and they are all missing. The beauty of this scenario, though, is that you get to choose what the 17 episodes are. They can be any missing episode of Doctor Who, but, and here's the horrible catch, because the search for missing episodes needs a dollop of heartbreak, it's part of the job. These will be the last episodes of Doctor Who ever to be found. After this, there will always be 80 missing episodes of Doctor Who. So, what are the last 17. You decide. Now, I sent this to various people, and after a sufficient period had accrued 112 responses. Now, this is not going to be 100% scientific. I only really asked people I know. I know "no" is quite loose these days. I've plenty of Facebook friends I've never actually met. And not everybody responded in the same way. Some couldn't or wouldn't get to 17. Others chose just a handful and left the rest to chance. There were various anomalies. But I managed to get a picture, a snapshot, of a select group of people's hopes and desires. And mostly, I've had fun seeing what was loved, what was ignored, and how annoying I found other people's sometimes ridiculous choices. So I make no claims that this is an accurate representation of anything apart from the opinions of 112 people in my orbit, most of whom are middle-aged men. So yes, this is no way controlled or a representative group. I was hoping for around 100, but I wasn't sure everyone would reply, so I aimed high. And just as I tabulated the results and started writing this up, someone else would respond and throw the results out of kilter, so I had to draw a line somewhere. So there will always be 112 missing episode poll responders, and it would be completely unreasonable to expect any more. Yes, I'd have liked more younger people, and definitely more women. In fact, I did approach a few women, but here's the story of my life. Most of them didn't get back to me. They're probably busy brushing their teeth. But that's not to say my Doctor Who friendship group isn't diverse. Good God, there's even a handful of them who aren't gay. I'm approaching the mathematical side of this in the way that Doctor Who itself approaches science. I'm going to try to make it sound convincing and dress it up with a bit of fun and drama, even though it is, deep down, hugely flawed and probably makes little sense. I don't have tabulators, collators, or a production team. It's just me. So there's bound to be miscounting and a flawed strategy and a general messiness. So if you sent me your answer and you're not featured here, I'm sorry. I was getting them back via WhatsApp, via Messenger, via email, via text. So if you fell through the cracks, like episode 2 of The Highlanders probably did somewhere, then I'm sorry. But what I do have is a willing bunch of interesting fans who have shared their thoughts, hopes, dreams, and film can fantasies. I've asked writers, a former politician, comedians, journalists, actors, missing episode finders, fans of yore who actually saw this stuff back in the day, and, well, of course, subscribers to my Patreon. That's patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. They're a benign and fascinating bunch of lovely, supportive folk who are just as important as anyone I've just listed, because you don't have to have had your name in print somewhere in order for your opinion to be valuable. Oh, and I also asked, Doctor Who.
Hello, Toby. David Tennant here. Long-time listener, first-time caller. This is a tricky assignment. 17 is a capricious number. Where does one begin? I want to complete things. So that, I think, has got to be one's first priority. So I think we have to start with the 10th planet, episode 4, I think. Just because that's sort of essential, isn't it? So let's have that. And then you've got to have Power of the Daleks. So you've got to have all of it. So that takes me up to 8. Leaving me with a 9. Now, what do I do with 9? Do I take... we're woefully low on Patrick Troughton, aren't we? So maybe we have to... I'd love to see the Macra Terror. I think I'd love to... But then... I can't walk away from this without seeing the Feast of Stephen. As someone who was in the second ever Doctor Who Christmas special, I feel we've got to see the first, because I can't really imagine what it's like. So I think I've got to have that one, which means really 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and that's 9. So I'm going to have all the missing episodes of the Dalek Master Plan, 10th Planet Episode 4, and the Power of the Daleks, 1 to 7. Not as much Patrick Troughton as I'd like, but I feel like you've painted me into a corner with your capricious number. I mean, I could do 5 different versions of this, but that's the one you're getting. Good luck.
Hang on. No, I was working from flawed data here. Power of the Daleks is 6 episodes. I've got one left. I mean, I'm tempted to go for Mission to the Unknown, because then the Dalek Master Plan is properly complete. But I think we go for Web of Fear episode 3, and then at least we've got one more complete Patrick Troughton story.
Because that's what the world needs more of, ultimately.
It's hard, this.
Oh, gosh, well, thanks to David for that. Oh, what a legend he is. And as demonstrated there, everyone will have their own method of working out what it is they want. Oh, and the 7 episodes of Power thing? Yeah, that was my fault. I sent Doctor Who a typo because I'm a twat. Well spotted, David. But he's just one example, and everyone has done this differently. The most obvious difference in approach was between those who wanted to return whole stories and complete partially missing ones, and those who wanted instead a selection of individual episodes, a smorgasbord that gave us at least a taste of something that is currently off the menu because we have none of its ingredients. And of course, the manner in which we take on a task like this says something about us. Some, for example, imposed strict rules upon themselves. Let me quote the writer Ian Potter, who is amusingly curmudgeonly about his geeky methodology. Said Ian, "I regret I have had to set ugly scientific parameters to govern my dreams that then upset me, but rules are rules. Rule 1, the episode gets a point if it has no telesnaps. Rule 2, the episode gets a point if the existing audio quality is, in my objective opinion, a bit grim. Rule 3, the episode gains a point if it completes a story partially in the archive, or a portion of a point if it goes some way towards doing that. Rule 4, the episode gains a point if it is from a story currently unrepresented in the archive. Rule 5, a point is deducted from final episodes. Even bearing in mind the fanish desire for tidiness expressed in Rule 3, the journey and the longing is always more important than the destination. We are going to be left wanting more here, and should always have some lingering, unfinished mystery to set our imaginations at. Oh, Ian, I love that idea. The never-ending lost stories of Doctor Who. Now, Ian may be a self-professed curmudgeon, but by God, there's some poetry in that. Former Doctor Who magazine assistant editor Peter Ware also had his own bespoke approach. First, says Peter, we need to ensure that we retrieve at least one episode from every story that's not currently represented in the archives. Secondly, we have to consider which missing episodes are poorly served with photos and telesnaps. Thirdly, missing episodes which feature important developments in the history of the series should be included. The first and last points Peter made there were echoed by many. A good denizen of Patreonville, Phil Chapman, neatly summed up an early emerging pattern and enunciated why many voters seem to lean towards particular instalments. I'm going to start by choosing episode 1 of each of the 10 completely missing stories, if you include Mission to the Unknown, said Phil. I reckon that having the scene-setting first episodes of these stories would make listening to the remainder on audio much more satisfying. And that's a popular strategy, although a good chunk of other correspondents aimed for the other end of a story completely, the climax, figuring that finales contained most of the excitement and import. No food tasting and corridor guarding here, when there could be dramatic deaths, deserved comeuppances, and plenty of explosions. Taking a different approach altogether, that wonderful writer Jack Rayner, yay, a woman, has a bee in her bonnet about characters and monsters that we have no existing photographs or footage of, and so a lot of her choices were based on filling in those gaps. She's also pretty obsessed with Dalek Master Plan and Mission to the Unknown delegates, and any chance to see those were top of her list. But it's not just characters and monsters. There are some key elements to the show that are currently unrepresented in the archives due to the missing episodes. The lack of Season 4, for example, means that a peccadillo of listener Chris Williams needs some help. Any episodes, says Chris, where Troughton wears that stovepipe/not stovepipe hat, we need to see it in action. I would like an episode like that. And then there's poor old Tutty Lemko, that brilliant, somewhat vivid character actor who appeared in memorable roles in Marco Polo, The Crusade, and The Mythmakers. And yet we have none of his performances to savour, because all of his episodes are gone. Indeed, he's not in The Celestial Toymaker, but he does get a credit on the dancing floor as he was its choreographer. So, of course, that one's missing as well. To be in one missing episode is unfortunate, but to have all your episodes destroyed? That feels like persecution. J. Jeremy Bentham, writer of Doctor Who The Early Years, nearly went for what he thought to be the most obvious route, and he told me that simple arithmetic would lead everyone to realise that you can squeeze a 7, a 4, and a 6-parter neatly into 17. And so, as he told me, Marco Polo, The Macra Terror, and Fury from the Deep, respectively Doctor Who at its most epic, its most sinister, and its most scary, would doubtless be the combination picked by everyone. So he decided to do orphaned episodes instead, and not choose them. Well, Jeremy, nobody actually did choose Marco, Macra, and Fury as a combo, actually, but, I was happy to receive your alternative variety pack selection, especially because, as Jeremy put it, he said to himself, "Right, Bentham, use that insight of having seen practically every episode since 1963 to argue for a selection that hopefully adds more key moments to the programme's overall history, fills in a few gaps, and leaves us with an example of every Doctor Who story from the beginning for folks to sample if they choose. Sounds good to me, Jeremy, and having input from people like him who saw these episodes go out has been a real thrill for me. Lucky devils. But, lucky old devils." In corresponding, some people needed to tell me what they originally went for but then rejected, as if they were memorialising those fallen soldiers they'd failed to go back for. The creator of hit ITV drama The Bay, Dara Carville, is an example of this. "OK, let me have a crack at this," he began. "My first thought was all of Marco Polo and the 10 missing eps of Masterplan. Bosh, 17 eps, done. But then you think, do we really need Feast of Stephen and Mission to the Unknown when we could have 10th Planet 4 and Web of Fear 3? Plus, this is all very Hartnell heavy, and one of the real joys of the rediscoveries is Troughton's performance. And overall, if we absolutely have to choose only 17, and that will be it forever, wouldn't it be good to have at least one episode from every story?" And so Dara ended up doing what most people did. He adopted the tapas approach. There were other peculiarities and patterns. One correspondent is so convinced that Marco Polo already exists, and that the Feast of Stephen will never be found, that he refused to put either on his list, as they'd just be a waste. I'd hate to see the state of the dentistry in his fruity fantasies. And there are those among you so taken with the animations, considering them representation enough, that they decided that the easiest episodes to rule out were those that we now have in cartoon form, which is very happy news for Team Doctor Who Animation, whose celebratory party will only be sullied by the fact that The Macra Terror Episode 1 has actually done especially well out of that story's instalments, despite only having a glimpse of the monster at the end of it, because, according to many voters, it will give them a chance to enjoy the rough and tumble machine scene, which, as you will recall, was deemed either too complex or too trivial to be included in the animation. Which just goes to show that you shouldn't undermine Doctor Who fans' capacity to bear a grudge against an editorial decision we disagree with and use every chance, including a trivial poll for a niche podcast broadcast several years after the event, to air said grievance. And that's the thing. We all enjoy Doctor Who in our own way, and for different reasons, even when we're making lists about it. Which is why we Doctor Who fans are all annoying idiots. And yet, somehow, brilliant annoying idiots. Oh, and talking of annoying idiots, my choices have not been included in the final figures. I am not one of the 112. Perhaps after all the number crunching and tabulating, I'll give you my choices at the end of the whole thing. But I am the returning officer on this occasion, not one of the electorate. And I'm also going to try not to let my feelings seep into the commentary here, which as ever I'll try to keep upbeat and complimentary anyway. No, I'm here to praise the Celestial Toymaker, not to keep it buried under the M6 underpass or wherever it's supposed to be. And, as I say, this is totally unscientific, but hopefully illuminating. And if it's not, then at least I hope it's an enjoyable romp, 6 out of 10, and some unreliable statistic on which we can hang some Doctor Who chat to eke out the time between now and when every cupboard-bound rusty film can in the UK has been inspected and returned home. Let me say how grateful I am to everyone who has responded. The phrase Sophie's Choice was used often because, of course, this isn't just about the episodes we rescue, it's about those we consign to oblivion too. Like choosing your favourite child is how listener Gavin Ware described it. And, as journalist and editor Ben Cook said after a tricky dilemma involving which episode of The Massacre he'd like to keep, this game is hard. And several others of you just decided to call me evil. Now, for those who want full stories back, whilst a few cannily filled in various gaps, the 2 absent from the invasion or the moon base or the crusade, for example, to maximise the number of complete stories we'd ultimately be left with, the most popular combo of whole stories was to accrue 3 otherwise totally missing tales. And it's 3 stories not normally gathered under the same umbrella: Marco Polo, The Mythmakers, and Power of the Daleks. An all-you-can-eat buffet of styles from diverse periods of the show's history, and that 7, 4 and 6-parter combo identified by Jeremy Bentham. He's a clever man. Jeremy thought, though, that people would choose Macra and Fury, but no, they signified nothing on this occasion, and the most popular way of filling in the allotted allocation was with the walking shadows currently inhabiting Cathay, Troy and Vulcan. And damn, though, because one of the reasons I'd chosen 17 episodes is because it's a prime number, and I assumed it'd be harder to fill the slot neatly without being artful, but I hadn't bothered to work out any possibilities beyond that. Oh well. Interestingly, whilst it may look like people were voting to complete stories like The Crusade and The Invasion because the votes for their missing 2 instalments are pretty equal, a surprising number of responders chose, say, either the Moonbase 1 or the Moonbase 3, but not both, and ditto The Invasion, episodes 1 and 4. But fate eventually pretty much evened them out. But most people, though, if they chose one from a half-complete story, actually chose both episodes, including writer, producer, Who animation trailblazer James Goss, who wanted the 2 outstanding episodes of The Invasion back because it would amuse me no end if the 2 episodes of The Invasion I was able to get Cosgrove Hall to animate came back. Somehow, I feel the irony would be delightful if the last episodes returned were the first ones animated, and possibly my one achievement I feel proudest of. I could then die with a bittersweet smile on my face. See, James, like me, has that masochistic tendency too, and I'm sure his fantasy threesomes are replete with halitosis and gingivitis. Yeah, I'm glad I'm not alone. So, here we go. I think there are some surprises herein, and some enlightening and sometimes appalling reasons for choosing, but it's all in the eye of the beholder, innit? And it's only a bit of fun. Indeed, someone I've hitherto considered quite sane referred to Mission to the Unknown as Mission to the Unknown /Dalek Cutaway in their missive. It's made me quite go off them if I'm honest. Anyway, let's cut away and embark on our own mission. Here for you is the definitive, if by definitive we mean by no means definitive and not featuring the opinions of many women or people under 30, list of which episodes people want back off of Missing Doctor Who. These are the results, in order, bottom to top. The most interesting and forensic part of this endeavour will be when we look at which individual episodes are most wanted, especially as solo instalments are often what turn up in collectors' cupboards. But we'll come to those shortly, and for American listeners, when I say episodes, I mean episodes, not stories, which you bizarrely refer to as episodes, when episodes are episodes, not stories, and stories stories. It's all in the name, guys. Anyway, but then again, I know what you call football. Let's look at the full stories first, or stories people want completed. Now, first we're going to remove Mission to the Unknown, The 10th Planet, and The Web of Fear from the equation, for now, as they only need one episode apiece to feel whole again, so we'll see how they fare in the individual episode scores which follow. And we also know, of course, that like the Time Meddler 4 and the War Machines 3 have key chunks missing, but no one felt the need to waste an episode for less than a minute's material, and so I've not factored them in here. I mention them now only because if I don't, then someone else will. Probably just when I'm foolish enough to sit back and try to enjoy the satisfaction of publishing something that's taken several days to put together and hoping I'd done a good enough job. I think you'll find catering for Doctor Who fans can be annoying. In many ways, I think we deserve to have some episodes missing. So, a reminder. Stories with more than one missing instalment are Marco Polo, The Reign of Terror, The Crusade, Galaxy 4, The Mythmakers, The Daleks' Master Plan, The Massacre, The Celestial Toymaker, The Savages, The Smugglers, The Power of the Daleks, The Highlanders, The Underwater Menace, The Moonbase, The Macra Terror, The Faceless Ones, Evil of the Daleks, The Abominable Snowmen, The Ice Warriors, Fury from the Deep, The Wheel in Space, The Invasion, and The Space Pirates. 23 stories in all. So, let's begin with the bad news. There are 4 stories that fandom, or middle-aged male fandom at least, isn't bothered about seeing from start to finish. They combined for joint bottom, and so, taking joint 20th place, are The Poor Unloved, Galaxy 4, The Savages, The Ice Warriors, and The Space Pirates. Now, this isn't to say some of these stories didn't score highly for selected instalments, but whilst everyone might want to see a bit more of these 4 tales with, let's be honest, varying reputations, absolutely no one aches to have these complete like they do, say, Hartnell's Finale or Troughton's Tube Tale, which are, to be fair, easier to finish off. And one of these stories will score far more for some of its individual episodes than a number of stories that beat it in the whole thing tally. It's a complicated process, this. So if you're sad your favourite is here, don't worry. You might still see some of it. Keith Miller, venerable long-time fan who founded the first official Doctor Who fan club back in the olden days, nearly voted for one of these, as he explained to me. "I was very tempted to include the Space Pirates," says Keith, "as I wanted to see if it was really as awful as I remember it, lol. Really, I was never more tempted to turn over to Lost in Space on ITV, which might give some insight as to why no one is looking to the pirates for buried treasure. Many voters cited seeing more of Patrick Troughton in action as being a major factor in their choices. This inventive, pesky actor is always throwing in value-added acting material that we can't possibly imagine without the ocular proof. But the fact that the Space Pirates is somewhat Troughton-light in certain instalments may have diminished its allure in the eyes of episode hunters. But let's be honest, it's never been a story with the strongest reputation, and the Pirate Light Episode 2 has hardly done anything to entice viewers to desire the rest of it. But some of these factors have actually assisted this story when it comes to individual returns, even if no one's bothered about seeing the whole thing. So stay tuned, Space Pirates fans. The Space Pirates will have its day, but appropriately perhaps, it might take quite a while to get there. As for the Ice Warriors, well, goodness, I remember when that was completely lost and so much desired. Like most of its season, which was represented by just 4 episodes when I was a boy, and none of them were from the Ice Warriors. But it seems that getting 2/3 of the Ice Warriors back some decades ago has been deemed enough to satisfy us, especially when other tales have no representation at all. And yet, one of those tales, The Savages, well, that's not represented, and that has been totally overlooked by you. Yes, each of its instalments has had some advocates, but no one is bothered about seeing all of this peculiar sci-fi tale of exploitation, even though it is one of the lesser-known entries into the canon. It hasn't aroused your curiosity enough to see the whole thing. And what about Galaxy 4? A much-loved story at the time, according to a memorable passage in Doctor Who: A Celebration. Well, it doesn't seem remotely loved these days, I'm afraid. The relatively recent return of Episode 3, Airlock, seems to have made us reject it on account of its appearance, which means, frankly, we haven't learnt a thing from it. So, those were bottom. No votes at all. Therefore, next up, in joint 18th place, well, we have a trio of Troughtons of differing styles but equal popularity, or lack thereof. The Underwater Menace, the Faceless Ones, and the Abominable Snowmen. So, the Underwater Menace featured in one of the most recent finds with the 2011, God, is it really that long ago, return of Episode 2, convincing only one voter that it's worth trying to get the remaining instalments in order that we have another whole story. Steve White chose the Underwater Menace for efficiency, really. He wanted to complete a story that has only 2 episodes left, and he prefers early Troughton to his other options, The Reign of Terror and The Ice Warriors. So nothing in the world could stop him from choosing the Underwater Menace in the end. If you listen to the wise people of the Missing Episodes podcast, they believe that the 2 instalments that are missing of the Underwater Menace are actually its most interesting and might improve our perception of the story. And with only 2 episodes needed, and the improvement of its reputation in recent years, anecdotally I get the impression that people think it's crap, sure, but fun crap. I'm slightly surprised this didn't do better. But just for full information, up until the last minute, I thought this had been voted for twice, but then a recount, I lost one of those votes. So it may be, if you're not Steve White and you voted for episodes 1 and 4, I somehow lost you in the melee. So if you want to count the Underwater Menace 1 place higher, then you can. The Faceless Ones was a very late bloomer here, and only 2 11th hour submissions ensured that certain episodes of this had any votes at all. One of those was from Dr. Simon Exton from the excellent Exton Moss Experiment podcast, an avowed Season 4 lover, and he's the only voter who wants all 4 missing instalments back from the Faceless Ones, which, seeing as we have 2 copies of Episode 1, seems only fair. That a story like this, that has much originality, a great cast and huge dollops of creepy menace, can fare so humbly is, I think, proof of the stiffness of the competition in the Missing Episode Olympics. Blipping on the radar alongside the Fish People and the Chameleons is a supposedly more popular foe, the Yeti, who only mustered their solo advocacy at practically the last minute too, thanks to listener Russell Cook, the only person to complete the Abominable Snowmen, which nestles next to its Troughton colleagues with 1 vote apiece here in joint 18th place, having been bottom with no votes until literally minutes before I completed the survey. Well done for returning the Holy Ganter in the nick of time, Russell. Former Holby City script editor Darren Thomas returned a good chunk of the Abominable Snowmen in his fantasy list, but couldn't manage every episode. But he described it as one story that's a big favourite of mine, and one I'd love to see completed. I first came to it as a Target novel, and then via the audio tapes release. Yetis, Tibetan monks, with lots of lovely location filming, albeit in Wales. So what's not to like? So the chance to grab 3 missing eps would be too good to ignore. But ignore episodes 4 and 5 he did, and so, as we'll see, it's another one where individual episodes have gone down pretty well, but the whole has been dragged down by the underperformance of other instalments. And so we move on in the list to joint 15th, and we have a curious duo of cellmates featuring each of the show's 2 most popular monsters. It's the Dalek's Master Plan and the Wheel in Space, which only 2% of voters want completed. Who's this bagsying the top bunk then? Well, it's a somewhat surprising lag, isn't it? Only the Dalek's Master Plan. Now, it's one of the most popular stories of the whole enterprise, with loads of people picking 1, 2, 3, and even 4 or 5 instalments of it. But only 2 of you want the whole thing. For these purposes, Mission to the Unknown is not counted as part of Master Plan. But seeing as one of those two people is Doctor Who himself, then that's okay. And at 9 episodes, you can see why people might only want a selection of instalments for flavour rather than spaff away half of their allocation. And, as we'll see, some elements of Masterplan prove to be much more popular than others. With the same score, but for very different reasons, I think, The Wheel in Space has a slightly easier job because it has 2 episodes extant and only needs a donation of 4 to get itself feeling full again. The 2% of you who are happy to see that occur stated that they've chosen this story in order to have Zoe's first adventure complete. Companions coming and going are often deciding factors for votes, as we will see. 1 vote ahead of these two and in joint 13th place, a pair of very different Hartnells. The Reign of Terror and the Celestial Toymaker. Season 1 has only 1 partially complete story. The totally absent Marco Polo is another matter, as we shall see. And completing this is the desire of 3% of you, all of whom state that it's completeness rather than a love for the story that is their motivation here. We like things tidy, don't we? We may not love The Reign of Terror, but we also won't kick it out of bed if doing so will make a mess. And I think we think if there was any justice, we'd be happier if part of it hadn't been lopped off by the guillotine of fate. Hopefully, some missing episode's Scarlet Pimpernel will assure that soon we can see it here, see it there, and see it everywhere, but especially on iPlayer. As for the Celestial Toymaker, it was very close to getting no votes at all, but that eternal Ludo player, that dungeon master of the ether, eventually managed to accrue 3 willing playthings to throw their dice in his favour. One of them was Darren Thomas. Again, he likes an underdog, our Darren, doesn't he? Who said, "I love this mad story and the ideas and fun it has. It's always been very different for a piece of Who, and I've always been fascinated by it. I loved the animated version released in conjunction with the Toymaker's return in 2023, but the chance to also have this in its complete form is too important for me not to want all of the remaining eps to enjoy it more fully." Big Finish writer Johnny Morris was aware that this won't be a popular choice, but was bullish. "I'd rather have 3 more episodes of The Celestial Toymaker than a single episode of The Massacre," he typed. Now, of course, you may well disagree with him, in which case I'd advise giving him a monumental tut and just moving on. But if his words have incensed you, then why not use the fact that The Celestial Toymaker is the only Doctor Who story to feature the N-word and hold up Johnny's advocacy of it as proof that he's a fascist and try to have him cancelled? It's what all the kids are doing these days. But seriously, folks, I know Johnny and he isn't a fascist. He's worse than that. He's a Liberal Democrat. Anyway, back to The Celestial Toymaker and Keith Miller, who watched it go out. "This story stuck in my mind, as it was just so odd," remembers Keith, "so it had to be saved. I remember thinking when the Doctor went invisible, after a couple of episodes, wouldn't it be awful if he became visible, but was another person completely? But that would be ridiculous, wouldn't it?" At 12, it's over to Season 4, and the second Doctor story, the totally missing The Highlanders, with nearly 4% of the vote. This is another of those stories that flies under the radar rather, and is quite tricky to categorise, even though it's the last pure historical for many years. It's a curious hybrid of the uncharacteristically grim, the boys' own adventure style daring-do historical, and the overly comedic romp. So much so, it's hard for us to have an absolutely cast-iron feel for this one, I'd venture. And yet, this is a fascinating showcase for a prototype Second Doctor who never quite got off the ground, almost detached from the story in a series of madcap guises. And despite it being one of the show's least-known stories, I would suggest it still has its fans. Gavin Ware, for example, said, "So much to enjoy here. Jamie's first story, early Troughton, and in drag too. Plus, if you don't like the story, you can enjoy the scenery of Scotland." Well, via Frensham Ponds, Gavin, but yes, I take your point. This is also tantalising, I think, because director Hugh David has done a Tutty Lemko, as his only other story was Fury from the Deep, and that's gone too, so we really can't be certain how his stuff looked. He was hugely admired, though, David, and all of the many people I've interviewed who worked with him said his work was damn good, so maybe his episodes will improve their reputations, if we can see them. Especially as this one is designed by Jeffrey Kirkland, a designer whose work took him to Hollywood and an Oscar nomination and indeed a couple of BAFTAs. And although it's only 12th here, there is some good news for the Highlanders in terms of Doctor Who royalty. I canvassed some of the stars of the missing episodes, but of course I wasn't going to ask them this whole 17 episodes malarkey for fear of sending them running for the hills, but I did request from them the name of the missing story of theirs they'd most like back. Fraser Hines, who played Jamie, who was in a lot of missing classics, says that actually it's this one that he wants to see because, as he tells me, it was the start of 3 happy years. Thanks, Fraser. Annika Wills, who played Polly, chose another story, which you'll discover soon, but mentioned this one in dispatches as runner-up because she said if we see it, it'll show a different side of Polly, and that it has a lot of enjoyable scenes of her being feisty and running rings around Michael Elwyn's Algernon Finch, trussing him up in a ditch and all sorts. Great fun. It was a really fun story, Annika told me on the phone last week on the run-up to her 84th birthday. Many happy returns, Annika. And let's hope for many happy returns of the missing episode variety, although the odds on one of them being from the Highlanders are actually quite low if the experts are to be believed. That news, well, it's enough to provoke a piper's lament. But things are looking up, because we are about to enter the top 10. And sharing the 10 spot, well, while you were sleeping, 5% of you may have heard a persuasive voice whispering in your ear that you should vote for the entirety of the Macra Terror. But you're not alone in bed tonight, because you're sleeping in a cove where they have also stashed all 4 episodes of The Smugglers, making for another unlikely duo. Uber-Whostorian Richard Bignell, a force for great good in the world of Doctor Who research, was one of those who preferred to choose mostly complete stories, and one of his choices was The Smugglers. The Smugglers, says Richard, has long been an underrated gem of a story. I managed to get a copy of Graham Strong's clear audio recording several years before the official BBC release, and it immediately became a firm favourite. The storytelling was clear and concise, and the whole thing was enormous fun. It would also be lovely to see the Cornish location work done for this story on beaches, farms, and out at sea. Listener Steve Walker concurs. We're really lacking the Ben and Polly stories, he says, so it would be nice to get that back, and it's one that feels really unknown to me, despite reading the novelisation and seeing a reconstruction. And you know who also chose The Smugglers? Annika Wills. And she was in Power of the Daleks and the Macra Terror, but nope, she chose the pirates and the horses and the cliff tops because my heart is forever on that beach in Cornwall, she says. So Polly wants all the pieces of this to wash up, please. And as for the Macra Terror, well, director John Davis only did one Doctor Who, and it was this one. And the scant evidence we have shows he was very ambitious and inventive, and his subsequent career, he did the epic BBC War and Peace, suggests a master craftsman. So this is another one where the proper visuals might contain some real treats, and I'll get very crabby with anyone who suggests otherwise. Writer and producer James Goss chose this as a whole story because, well, I can't explain why, says James, but I just bet that it's great and unlike any Doctor Who before or since. So yes, an entire story that we can just revel in and marvel over in the same way we all fell in love with Enemy of the World. Wouldn't that be nice? To go from being intrigued and almost fearful of the Macra Terror to delighted to, oh that, as we flick past it on the iPlayer. Haha, ain't that just the truth? Thanks, James. Sadly, though, for now, there is no such thing as Macra. And at number 9, it's... Well, it's the much-loved Fury from the Deep, with 6% of the vote. This moody, atmospheric tale is the last wholly missing episode story, and was, ironically, among the last to be wiped. And we have a few tantalising clips that suggest it was rather special. Director Hugh David again. Writer Paul Kirkley wanted it all. "We should also have a complete Troughton," he said, "and this is the base I'd most like to see under siege, I think, though it breaks my heart to consign Evil of the Daleks to the deadly dustbin of history." Former Doctor Who magazine contributor, Blue Peter editor, and Doctor Who producer-biographer Richard Marson said of Fury that it's "a story I've longed to see ever since I first realised it was missing. The clips and soundtrack whet the appetite. Plus, it's Victoria's farewell." It may seem that this story has underperformed, but that isn't necessarily due to it being unpopular. A huge number of people have voted for one or more episodes of this, but the whole 6 seem to have been considered an extravagance. So a lot of people have chosen 1 or 2 instalments, but a different 1 or 2. It's a story that's popular, but no one can be certain which bits of it are the best, and so the votes got spread a bit. It's the kind of story that needs proportional representation, not first past the post. Yep, you heard it here first. Fury from the Deep is the Green Party of Doctor Who, which is actually appropriate, seeing as one of its guest stars, the mighty John Abernethy, was partially responsible for the Green Party being so named. Oh, it's getting quite Reithian now, isn't it? Now all they need to do is adopt seaweed as their emblem. Missing Episodes guru Richard Molesworth, who literally wrote the book on the subject, summed up the trickiness with Fury. "It's almost impossible to pick an episode for Fury from the Deep," he says. "Parts 2, 3, 4 and 5 have such epic cliffhangers, while Part 1 seems so spooky and atmospheric, and Part 6 has Victoria's departure. So, some of you went for it all, but most picked just a selection." One place above it, flying on a Kirby wire in at number 8, is another centre of operations under besiegement, this one armed only with a tea tray to keep it safe, the Moon Base. Now, the Moon Base hasn't done brilliantly in the individual episode stakes, but enough of you wanted it to be completed for it to have posted a respectable score here, with a not-too-shabby 7.5% of you wanting it back, including writer Simon Farker, because, in his view, what exists is so good. Like the Underwater Menace, though, there is a consensus that what is missing, notably Episode 3, might be the best bits of the story, which adds to the allure of its completion. For Darren Thomas, the chance to complete the Moonbase would be amazing, as it's one of my favourite Cybermen stories, very creepy and evocative, with the spooky, silent Cybermen picking off the crew. The animation for the missing episodes does work really well, though, and so I'm tempted not to include it. Oh, but I can't. Well, how very clever of him, because include it he did, and got it into a decent position. Above it, though, in joint 6th place, there is a tie between 2 stories with a common problem. It's the Crusade and the Invasion, proving a tad more popular than the Moonbase in terms of stories which only need a couple of episodes adding in order to bring them to full strength. And so it's no surprise that similar voting patterns brought a tie for these 2, even though they're tales which offer very different kinds of delights. The Crusade, for Richard Marson, is essential because it completes this superior historical and the 2nd season of the show. Anything directed by the great Dougie Camfield is to be cherished. As Richard points out, we would finally have a 60s season with no missing instalments, and this is our best chance of doing that, which definitely swayed some voters in the Crusade's favour. Quality is one thing, but neatness, whoa, hold me down. But what about the Invasion? Well, Radio Times scribe Patrick Mulcan chose it because it would be completing a great classic, he says, directed by Douglas Camfield. The surviving episodes almost work without them, but not quite. The first episode is essential, setting up the story with a very Quatermass 2 tone, lots on film. And episode 4 has the fabulous helicopter rescue action scene, which I remember watching as a little kid. It was so costly, a later one in the story more or less happens off-screen. A note that both of those men cite Douglas Camfield, a very able Doctor Who director, as a key reason for picking these two stories for completion. The director, more than anything, will dictate whether we can be optimistic about the images we may see again, and Camfield's record, well, it's unimpeachable. And now we enter the top 5. Being at the business end of this part of the poll is one heck of an achievement, especially when you need 6 whole episodes to complete you. But whilst Evil of the Daleks scores very highly on a couple of significant instalments, the whole thing has only gradually risen up the ranks and finally sits here at 5 with 11% of the vote. Evil is, for listener Jonathan Evans, one of the richest and most archetypal Doctor Who stories of all time. Former NP and now Telegraph columnist Tom Harris chose it because it was a monumentally important and, dare I say, iconic adventure that needs to be restored. True story, says Tom, I actually saw this as a kid, probably on its repeat broadcast. American film collector Steven Seagal chose it because, as he says very pithily, it's evil. Enough said, whilst Keith Miller needed it back because it's a total classic. The look of barely concealed terror when Pat turns to see the Dalek emerge from the time portal is just chef's kiss. And the Dalek Emperor was class. I never believed for a second that this was the final end. Well, let's hope that with all this manifesting, its currently mostly missing status isn't the final end for this absolute epic. In at 4, we have one of the most unfortunate Doctor Who adventures, but that hasn't stopped it from transforming in my lifetime from one that was pretty obscure and not really that talked about, bar from a few moments at the end, which don't really have much to do with the adventure itself, to the look-alike in recent years that has become championed by certain connoisseurs and has managed to get 14% of the vote with which to butcher the competition. Appropriate conduct for The Massacre. The Massacre is one of only 3 stories, and one of those is Mission to the Unknown, which might not count because it's only a single episode, from which we have no moving footage at all. We also have no telesnaps and only a handful of production photographs. It's a story that makes me so excited I don't even get too cross when people add unnecessary words to its title. A decent chunk of you wanted the whole thing back, because it's a strong story, but also because you'd miss certain key elements if you only chose one episode of it. Canadian fan Stephen Shapansky, one of the hosts of the brilliant Radio Free Skaro podcast, told me, I tried to pick 1 or 2 episodes to leave room for others, but no. The double performance from Hartnell, what did he look like as the Abbot? Peter Purvis carrying the story in Hartnell's absence, and that electric final monologue from Hartnell in Part 4. And how much of that shoddy TARDIS was seen during Dodo's introduction scene? Ha! This knackered TARDIS prop, mentioned there by Stephen, seen in those publicity shots announcing Dodo, has attracted far more attention than I anticipated. More attention, actually, than other things in the story, like the extraordinary cliffhanger in which Admiral de Coligny reveals himself to be the Sea Beggar, which is a sickening twist, Joan Young's brutal performance as Catherine de Medici, and the pervasive atmosphere of doom that hangs over this tense and intelligent 4 episodes. But hey, I'm sure it'll take the votes where they come. One full set of Massacre episodes request came from the historian Richard Bignell, who said, I think The Massacre is a remarkable story, very adult and very different to much of the fantasy that surrounds it, supported by some genuinely, judging from the audio, excellent performances. It would also be lovely to see Hartnell as the Abbot of Amboise. The Points West pantomime interview with Hartnell, conducted 10 months later, shows just how different he was in real life and how the Doctor was very much a character he was playing. So it would be fascinating to see just how he handled playing a dual role in the story and just how different the Abbot came across from the Doctor. I'd also be fascinated to see Dodo's introduction as well and see firsthand just how much of that shonky TARDIS prop they used for the location shoot on screen. Oh, and I was born the same day as the final episode was shown. I was only 9 hours old at the time of broadcast, so I don't remember it. Another vote for the terrible TARDIS. Stephen says shoddy, Richard says shonky, but neither of them want to call the whole thing off. In fact, they want to call it in. Oh, and happy birthday, Richard. But bad, Richard, for not taping the massacre when you were fresh from the womb. Call yourself a fan? Another fan, illustrious Who scribe Paul Cornell, also chose the massacre and a couple of other historicals because we could see all that acting, he says. Oh, he's a man after my own heart. Listener Paul Goodridge tried to resist using a chunk of his allocation on this one tale, but I wanted to be more selective, but it sounds incredible, and I want it all back, he says. So all back it is, Paul, in your land of dreams, of course. Oh, and this story is the choice of another Doctor Who regular. I asked Peter Purvis, a.k.a. Space Astronaut Stephen Taylor, which missing story of his he most wanted to see, and he told me, there is one serial that stands out head and shoulders as the one I would like to see. That is the Massacre of St. Bartholomew's Eve. As of now, nothing exists, and it was, of course, in black and white. But it is a fabulous historical story, and my character has virtually the leading role in it. It was peopled by a wonderfully seasoned cast of excellent actors, and gave us all something in which to get our teeth well and truly stuck. I think it is a forlorn hope, but you never know. There are currently rumours of episodes being found, but I doubt they will ever turn up. And if the occasional can of telecine does turn up, I suspect that the film inside will have deteriorated beyond repair. One can always hope, and especially I would like to see my performance in it, because I have never seen it. Oh, Peter, sounding a pessimistic note there, like a bell of doom. Well, this is a Doctor Who podcast. We need some negativity. Talking of which, sometimes the reason things miss out on votes are just as interesting as why they garner them. Correspondent Steve White is an example. Now, I love the massacre, says Steve, but frankly, I also like my Doctor Who to have Doctor Who in it. And without the Doctor in the story, it's just another historical drama. So if this is all we're going to ever see of 60s Who, it's got to be consigned to history, I'm afraid. Please, put down those pitchforks and stop looking at me like that. I might have to unleash an angry mob on Steve. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? The other non-mission story with no surviving moving footage at all, no censor clips, no off-air cine, nothing, is the one at number 3. And it's the third of the totally missing M's of Mission, Massacre, and, well, itself. The popular epic Marco Polo. Seeing as it is 7 whole episodes, bringing it back in its entirety is quite a commitment, but it was a commitment 20% of you were prepared to make. Journalist Paul Kirkley said, I know this makes a sizable dent in the 17, but you want at least one complete story per Doctor, right? And this is the earliest example of Doctor Who that we don't have. I also have a sneaking suspicion that, being a historical, it will have aged better than some of the ones with space robots and stuff. Certainly, the script is lyrical and intelligent, as opposed to just being a capture-escape kiddie runaround. The sets and costumes look stunning too, so it would be fascinating to know if they succeeded in capturing the story's madly ambitious scale. Writer of Doctor Who the early years, and a viewer since day one, Jeremy Bentham desperately wanted to choose all of this story, emphasising how difficult it was to pick just one episode. For many decades, says Jeremy, I've had a fascination with this magnificent 7-part serial. The performances, the direction, the set design, the music, the lighting, and, not least of all, a quite beautifully written storyline and set of scripts penned by John Lucarotti. Even more jaw-dropping is realising this continent-spanning travelogue, ranging from the frozen Himalayas to the opulent summer palace of Kubla Khan, was recorded in that tiniest, ancient, and most poorly equipped facility at BBC Lime Grove, Studio D, the original home of Doctor Who. Yes, it would be truly wonderful to have all 7 episodes recovered, restored, and put out in the public domain so that others can share my appreciation of its scale and ambitions. But how to choose just one, if that had to be the Faustian deal? Part 7, with its spectacular sword fight between Polo and Tigana. Part 2, with all the technical challenges of staging a sandstorm in a video studio with minimal recording pauses. Or maybe Part 5, with that nail-biting conclusion as Tigana steps out of the shadows and threatens Susan's escape by holding a knife to her throat. Surely a camera shot that would never be allowed today. Jeremy ended up choosing just one instalment, but I thought it worth quoting his view of the whole thing. And to be honest, even if he had gone for all 7 episodes of Marco Polo, it would still have been in 3rd place, but only just, as it's tight at the top. Before we get to the final results then, let's look at some interesting patterns. Marco Polo's done very well. 3rd place is not bad at all. However, most people, as we will see later, tended to go for a broad spread, selected episodes from each story they wanted to see, and this is where the otherwise popular Marco suffers in one sense, in a similar way that Fury from the Deep does, in that nobody could quite decide which episode to choose, because pretty much each one of them has something to recommend it. So those choosing, say, 1 or 2 episodes of Marco only were completely varied in their choice, and so their reasoning. As a result, no individual episode of Marco is really in the top tier, and yet it is one of the stories most mentioned by everyone. More proof, where it needed, that democracy is an inherently flawed concept. And while we're here, a word about the historical stories, those without any science fiction elements beyond the regulars and their ship. There are many of them among the missing episodes, and it's a genre that still divides opinion. According to my findings, they are generally very popular these days, and a huge number of you want to see them represented, but maybe it's just that my friends and colleagues, who are the people who were surveyed, are all just boring old people who like boring old things. I mean, it's distinctly possible they like me. Or, perhaps like the historicals, they entertain the idea of me, but don't especially look forward to seeing me. Anyway, there are exceptions worth noting and quoting for balance. Missing episodes expert Richard Molesworth, for example, says, "I can't find it in my heart to give Marco Polo an extant episode. Out of all the missing stories, this is the one whose popularity mystifies me. Historicals aren't for me, and for that reason I'm not going to bring to life any episodes of The Smugglers or The Highlanders either." Now, the historicals are for a lot of people. Not always for the reasons you'd expect, though. Take listener Colin Varney Earworm, for example, who's been watching the show since day one. He has chosen some historicals, unlike Richard, but sums up the modern experience of them. "I would have underappreciated these as a child," says Colin, "because I preferred marauding monsters to wit and drama, but have since enjoyed them as books and audio." And so, Colin would like to experience those stories he didn't really enjoy as a kid, as an adult. Now, that's definitely part of the strange relationship a lot of listeners have with these stories. They might not have done the job they were designed to do back in the 60s. A lot of fans from those days tell me how boring they found the historicals, I have to be honest, which is why they were eventually cancelled. And yet, those stories, it seems, have matured like a fine wine. So the people they weren't designed for, middle-aged men in the future, could wax lyrical about their sophisticated bouquet. Time travel. It's a funny old thing. And as the perceptive among you will have noticed, there are only 2 stories left in this part of the poll, the whole stories part of the poll. 1 science fiction and 1 historical. In the tussle for first place, these top 2 swapped places several times. The runner-up was actually in the lead for most of the process, and was scuppered at literally the last minute, when a couple of illustrious contributors, one of whom you'll hear from later, and the other of whom is that brilliant writer Jack Rayner, whose vote actually decided a couple of key battles without her knowing that she was even fighting in them. So, I didn't get a contribution from many women, sure, but this particular woman I did get really made her mark. Jack didn't actually vote for this story, but she did vote for the winner, which meant that first place just avoided being a tie, and that with 23% of the vote, The Power of the Daleks, a landmark story in so many ways, but not voted for in its entirety by Jack, comes a surprising second. Oh, but it's got so much, hasn't it? Troughton's first steps, the stovepipe hat, Ben and Polly, Robert James's much-lauded descent into madness as Lesterson, cunning Daleks, I am your servant, the production line, that gun battle finale. Oh, there's so much. And it's a tense and well-written tale in its own right, regardless of its place in history. And yet, we do have a lot of the key moments captured by that doughty Australian with his Super 8 camera, and clips of it seem to turn up on a regular basis, so maybe there's a slight element of familiarity with it that gave enough people pause, and so prevented it from steaming fully ahead. But it has lots of fans, many of whom went straight to it without thinking. Richard Molesworth, for example. This one was his immediate choice, along with an obvious bedfellow. Richard said, "It seems very, very important to me that we should have 10th Planet and Power of the Daleks complete, so that we have, at last, the first and last stories of every Doctor now available. We'd also have 2 more complete stories, but that's a secondary bonus. To have the end of Hartnell's era and the beginning of Troughton's tenure would be so significant. It would dwarf the importance of the other 10 episodes I've yet to nominate. These 7 are no-brainers of the exercise. Have I gone too hard too early with all 6 episodes of Power? No. It's the most significant missing story there is, and apart from a few nice clips, it is all missing. And it's a Dalek story. Double bubble." As for writer Eddie Robson, "We have no complete Troughton stories," he says, "from his first season, and I wanted to get one back. I was torn between this and Evil, but the first episode of this one is non-negotiable. Troughton's first performance in the role has to be top priority, and so I figured, let's go for all 6. Power provides some very interesting results in the individual episode categories too, so we will be hearing much more about it later. But for now, it has been pushed aside, thanks to the heaving of less than 1% of you, taking nearly a quarter of everyone's votes, though, and the biggest slice, just, of those selecting whole stories. Straight in at number 1, it's too late to say woe to the Mythmakers. Well, isn't that a thing? I bet even Cassandra never saw this coming. This was a story nobody talked about when I was younger. Yeah, it was Vicky's last story and Katerina joined, but it was mostly, it was written by that guy who wrote The Gunfighters, then considered the worst story of all time, and we have about 3 photos from it. Oh, and there's a good anecdote about Francis de Wolfe doing a joke about William Hartnell being a ham. And, that's it. We've had a few more pictures turn up since, but not many, and some cine films snatched from the ether, but there's not a lot to go on, bar the soundtrack, and a few characters, because we have no telesnaps, we have no imagery of at all. Now, it could be that the voters I have access to are in my orbit because there is a comic element to much of my output, and indeed outlook, so people more sympathetic to Donald Cotton's often delightfully absurd whimsy may be overrepresented in my catchment area. And it may be that missing episode obsessives are also fans of 60s Who, and so more likely to be drawn to something as offbeat and sci-fi free as this than, say, die-hard Pertwee or Hinchcliffe years types who like their Who action-packed and monsters, and that's a perfectly fair position. So it may be that this poll has been skewed. But maybe it beat Power. The Mythmakers beat Power of the Daleks. Ha! It toppled an icon. How appropriate. Because it had a greater variety of treasures within its individual instalments than Troughton's debut does. And perhaps because it has the advantage of being a fairly economical choice in that it only needs 4 episodes to be completed. Nonetheless, It's a hell of an achievement. And the Mythmakers is bloody great. And it's appropriate that it's taking legendary status here, although by its own rules it should be knocked off its own pedestal and mocked for having ideas above its station. It's achieved the lofty heights its own writer would gleefully want to topple it from. Listener Paul Goodridge said, "This should win every Hartnell poll." Well, it has, Paul, kinda. And likely would if it existed. It's like they invented Blackadder 20 years early, including the ending of Blackadder Goes Forth. And as for Gary Russell, he said, "My only complete story I want back. The last of the good historicals, and important for Vicky and Katerina." For Tom Harris, "It's a wonderful story and script, and Vicky deserves to be seen taking her undeserved leave of the TARDIS. So, that has put the cat among the pigeons, or the horse amongst the Trojans. But, and I know this is what you've all come for, we get a better picture of what is popular." This is what you've come for, he says, an hour and 12 minutes in. Yeah, that wasn't the plan. Anyway, on we go, and I do go on. We get a better picture of what is popular and what isn't by looking at individual episodes, because, frankly, most people have taken the tapas approach, a selection of examples from a number of stories. For most people, representation is better than completion. It feels like you're getting more bang for your boot sale buck if you have a selection of goodies. But before we begin the countdown of each episode in turn, let's hear from another illustrious hooer who was kind enough to contribute some audio to this, and so prevent it from being an uninterrupted splurge of me, presumably licking his wounds from his ancestors only managing the runner-up spot. It's only one of the 21st century Daleks, a.k.a. actor Nicholas Pegg, also an erudite regular contributor to various Doctor Who publications and media releases. Over to you, Nick.
Hi, Toby. Hello, everyone. Oh, my goodness. So, I've got to whittle 97 missing episodes down to 17, and those are the only ones that I'll ever get to see. What a great game. And what absolute torture. Well, it seems to me that there are, broadly speaking, two different ways that you could look at this. You could either try to cover as much ground as possible by picking a selection of episodes to represent as many different stories as you can, or you could instead take the approach that an even more exciting thing would be the recovery of whole, complete missing serials that we could watch from start to finish, and that is quite exciting, isn't it? I mean, I'm so old that I still get a bit excited every time I remember that we've got the Tomb of the Cybermen back. So if we've got 17 episodes to play with, we could retrieve 4 completely missing 4-parters. That'd be 16 episodes, and we'd still have room for part 4 of the 10th Planet, and that's quite tempting too. So anyway, after a great deal of deliberation, what I've actually done is I've kind of gone half and half on those two different ways of looking at it. I have recklessly burned up 10 whole episodes just on recovering 2 complete stories, and for the rest I've gone for individual sort of landmark episodes. So, without further ado, here are my fantasy film cans. And, well, to start with my most extravagant item of expenditure, I'm going to splurge 6 whole episodes on the complete recovery of Patrick Troughton's first story, The Power of the Daleks. I mean, obviously, historically it's a landmark story for any number of obvious reasons, and, how wonderful it would be to be able to see Patrick Troughton's first performance as the Doctor, and to see Ben and Polly, struggling to understand what's happened. But over and above all that, it's just a really good story, isn't it? Hands down, I think it's one of the best Dalek stories. It's got so much going on, I think it's possibly, apart from a few bits in Master Plan, it's the first time we really get to see that sort of wily side of the Daleks. Their sort of cunning and deceitfulness, biding their time and pulling the wool over the eyes of various gullible characters until it's too late. Wonderful stuff. So I'd like parts 1 to 6 of The Power of the Daleks, please. And along with that package, let's just add in the episode that comes directly before it, part 4 of The 10th Planet. I mean, come on, we all want that one, don't we? Again, besides the obvious historical importance of that episode, I do think, on the basis of the other 3, it's a very well-made story. You know, it's Derek Martinus, isn't it, directing? Really stylish stuff. And I love those original Cybermen too. So yeah, let's complete the 10th planet. So that's going to leave me with 10 more episodes now. And I'm going to go on another spending spree. And I'm going to splurge 4 whole episodes on one more complete story. This is a story that's always intrigued me. It's tremendously well written. It's funny in places, it's tragic in other places, it's got a great supporting cast, and to judge by the soundtrack, William Hartnell is fabulously on form. So I would like episodes 1, 2, 3 and 4 of The Mythmakers, please. You know, as well as being a story that I'd just dearly love to see, I feel that we ought to have at least one more complete serial from that heavily missing period in season 3. Right, so I'm now down to my last 6 episodes, and from now on it's going to be singletons all the way. Going right back to the beginning then, and going through them in chronological order. I expect there might be some gasps of horror now as I reveal the shocking news that Marco Polo has not made my final selection. I know, God, I'd love to see it, but you can't have everything, can you? And actually there is a historical story featuring Ian and Barbara that I love even more than Marco Polo. And even though we've already got 2 episodes of it, I'm plumping for another one. So next on my list is The Night of Jaffa, the 2nd episode of The Crusade. Again, I think it's just such a strong story, you know, very well crafted, such a great cast. And whenever I get to the end of watching part 1, I get terribly frustrated that I can't see part 2 as well. Ian getting knighted by Richard the Lionheart and sent on a courtly errand to rescue Barbara, and Barbara being spirited away by the vengeful villain with the help of that treacherous merchant. I mean, what's not to love? So, yeah, having that run of the first 3 episodes of The Crusade would be such a treat. And if I had that, I think I could almost live without episode 4. Okay, moving on. Next up, I've got another sort of high-class Hartnell historical. My next pick is Bell of Doom, the final episode of The Massacre. Gosh, what a strange story this is, and I love it. Back in the mists of time, sometime in the 1980s, The Massacre was one of the first stories I had on a kind of a bad quality pirate audio tape, and I played it over and over, trying to imagine what it would have looked like. And really, I could have chosen any episode from this story, but I've gone for part 4 because, okay, we wouldn't get to see William Hartnell playing the abbot, but we do get that wonderful soliloquy of the Doctors in the TARDIS at the end, and then of course we get the arrival of a new companion, Dodo, to join Stephen. And before that, we get the build-up to the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre itself, and the way that it was portrayed, apparently, in this sort of montage of woodcuts. I'd love to see what that looks like. So, Massacre Part 4, please. And next up, I've got another Part 4. Jumping to the other end of the Stephen and Dodo era, I'm voting for Episode 4 of The Savages. That's another strange story, isn't it? So intriguing, so overlooked. And I'm going for part 4 so that we can see Frederick Jaeger doing his Hartnell impersonation, which sounds so good in the audio. And of course, we would also get to see the final showdown and then the departure of Stevens. So another lovely landmark episode from a little-known story, and I'd love to see that. 3 more to go, and I'm going historical again with episode 1 of The Smugglers. All sorts of lovely reasons here. Ben and Polly at the very start of their adventures in the TARDIS, and the Doctor getting stuck into some good old Daphne du Maurier swashbuckling fun. But most of all, what draws me to this one is the location filming. We're coming towards the end of the Hartnell era, but as far as production is concerned, we're already starting to see the beginning of a new era, aren't we? With the show stepping outdoors a whole lot more. You know, we're not too far away now from some real sort of showpiece location shoots like the Abominable Snowmen up in Wales. But at the time, The Smugglers was by far the most extravagant location trip that Doctor Who had taken. I mean, of course, you know, we'd had stuff like the London filming in the Dalek Invasion of Earth and the War Machines, but this was the first time that Doctor Who upped sticks and caught the location buster somewhere exotic, and, you know, they spent several days down in the far west of Cornwall on the Land's End Peninsula. And in fact, apart from a few shots in the War Machines, I think this is the only story for which William Hartnell himself went off on location. And I want to see that. I want to see Billy on location on the beaches and the cliffs of Cornwall. So I've gone for part 1 of The Smugglers because it's a nice, tight little episode with lots of good scenes for the Doctor and for Ben and Polly, and because it's got plenty of that location filming. Lovely. Okay, so together with part 4 of The 10th Planet, which you already know about, that's my 9 William Hartnell episodes. And I've been quite even because I've got 9 Hartnells and 8 Troughtons, 6 of which you also already know about, Power of the Daleks. So for my final 2, I'm going to go for episode 1 of The Macra Terror, another intriguing story with a great atmosphere and a great first episode full of funny bits and spooky bits. So I think it's got to be part 1. And finally, I'm going to fast forward another year or so and go for episode 6 of Fury from the Deep. Now, it might be said, with some justification, that following on from the 10th Planet and the Moon Base and the Ice Warriors and so on, we've got yet another base under siege story with a shouty commander who refuses to listen to the Doctor. But I think we can see from the few little bits of surviving footage that Fury from the Deep was tremendously well made. And those final scenes of the seaweed monster on the rampage do look like they were probably really impressive and quite exciting. And of course we also have the departure of Victoria at the end. So yeah, that's an episode that I'd love to see. And that's my 17. And I'm already starting to feel guilty about some of the ones that didn't make it. Marco Polo, Evil of the Daleks, sorry. So I think I'd probably better sign off now before I change my mind about the whole lot.
Oh, thanks, Nick. And without further ado, let's begin the countdown to the most desired single missing instalment by completers of this poll. And whether we like it or not, the bottom is always a very interesting place to be. Hey, that's what I've been told by a high proportion of my Doctor Who fan chums anyway, etc. Sorry. And after all, more people read 1-star and 5-star reviews than middling ones, so let's see what hasn't prospered, or even featured on people's wish lists, as we count down to the most desired single missing instalment out of Doctor Who's 97, for now, missing episodes. In at joint 94th, the bottom, with no votes whatsoever. God, it's cruel, isn't it? With precisely 0 votes, 0 points, no percentage of the voting population of the 112 people I managed to gather together. It's a quartet of the undesirable, comprising of Galaxy 4, Episode 1, 400 Dawns. Galaxy 4, Episode 2, Trap of Steel. The Ice Warriors, Episode 3. And The Space Pirates, Episode 3. Oh, the portents were not good for these ones. Galaxy 4 was joint bottom of the story pool, and it's not faring any better here. As Johnny Morris said in his email, the boring answer would be to say that any episodes would be a blessing, but beep that. I think we could all cope without another episode of Galaxy 4. So despite me, if I'm honest, worrying and thinking that people would just be boring and choose to complete mostly extant stories, just to plug gaps, it seems that there are some adventures that people have decided we actually have plenty of already, thank you very much. And even though this one has no telesnaps, which usually means people want to get something back, Galaxy 4 Part 1 looks like it's probably going to be the least required episode of all, seeing as we already have about a quarter of it anyway, thanks to a returned clip. But it seems that the recent return of Episode 3 has actually done little to convince the world we need any more of it, with only one of its missing instalments getting any votes at all. But not these two. Poor old Galaxy 4. It seems nobody is interested in 400 Dawns, despite it having the delights of Vicky finding and naming the Chumbleys. The episode also contains more sexism than the demographic makeup of my polling, and the lack of women voters here did nothing to hinder any punishment due to Stephen's declaration that the blonde female Dravins are a lovely surprise. Still, from the cine clips, it does have a lovely shot descending on the TARDIS column, and the cliffhanger is very good, and it features the astral map. As for Episode 2, Trap of Steel, haven't you ever tried being friendly, says Stephen. Well, clearly no, not to this instalment, despite it having no surviving clips, cine or censor or telesnaps. We have nothing from it at all. Like the Dravins herein, it can be lost forever, consumed by an inferno, and that's that. There is still hope for Episode 4, though, so keep rooting for the Rills. The Ice Warriors has only 2 missing episodes, and people only want to see one of those back, the second, which would leave it like the Web of Fear, and missing only its 3rd instalment. The difference here, though, is that Web 3 is quite strongly desired. Quite why this poor episode, The Ice Warriors 3, has hurt anyone, only the voters can say, but I was a little surprised by this. I thought with the instalments of this story, everyone would choose either both or neither. But no, this one nobody wanted at all. And it has some stunning moments, including the emergence of Zondal from his block of ice, the gathered warriors melting their spaceship free, and some nice character moments between Penley and Miss Garrett, and Clent and Arden, who doesn't make it out of the episode alive, and so is a trifle underrepresented in the archives. And that's a shame, as George Waring is one of the great reliable character turns of the 60s, 70s and 80s, and settles in nicely amongst one of the best guest casts this series has ever assembled. The middle bit of the Space Pirates, three's not so much a crowd as a loner, it seems, is similarly unloved, and even though its later instalments have done surprisingly well, it's not hard to understand why this one has struggled, as it's never been a hugely popular story, has it? I think it's got the lowest score on IMDb of any classic Who story. It did last time I looked. Still, the episode 3, does contain the scene in which Milo Clancy's teapot gets broken, which I've actually managed to acquire a lovely anecdote about from one of the story's crew. But sadly, if you lot have your way, well, an anecdote it must remain. So, that's it for the great unloved episodes. Maybe if more women had been involved in the polling, Galaxy 4 might have done better. But then, you see, if we had given women their say, they'd have probably judged everyone by appearances and tried to conquer space, so, perhaps they should stay in the galactic kitchen. What? I'm only being educated by Doctor Who, guys. It's the message of the show, so, be kind. And occasionally a bit misogynistic. Actually, though, can I say, daftness aside, I do actually know a lot of women, even though they're not in this poll. I know I have women. I know women. It's just that my women Doctor Who fan Venn diagram just doesn't have a massive yoke, that's all. I mean, indeed, my partner, Cheryl has... I can't believe I'm going to tell you this. She's never watched a classic Doctor Who story in its entirety. I know it's disgusting, isn't it? If her car breaks down on a doomed planet, I might just leave her there. Partially because, I can't actually drive. Anyway, cruising up on the missing episodes highway, let's pull into 93rd place. With just one vote, it's an episode all on its own. It's episode 2 of The Savages. Episode 2 of The Savages is this obscure story's least desired instalment. So, why did its solo advocate, Big Finish writer Jonathan Morris, choose this one, episode 2 of The Savages, over the competition? For the record, he didn't choose any of the story's other more popular instalments. He just chose episode 2. Well, Johnny wanted to celebrate another aspect of this thoughtful, sometimes lyrical, and currently mysterious fable. I want to see Nanina's bum, says he. Oh, you've got to watch these Liberal Democrats. Johnny may have voted for reasons of, essentially, humour, but episode 2 does actually contain the Savages' most memorable dialogue exchange, I would say, in which Hartnell, on imperious form, gives the elders a dressing down for their attitudes towards progress and exploitation. That, sir, is protracted murder indeed. But despite the brilliance of this scene, one of Hartnell's great moments, I'd say, as he is imperious with righteous fury, indifference has sucked the essence out of this episode and left it rather lifeless, near the bottom of the table. And to add insult to injury, this episode got the same amount of votes as 3 things not actually in the competition. The lost Peter Cushing radio pilot Journey into Time from 1966, written by Malcolm Hulke, was voted for by writer, producer and podcaster Dylan Reese. And then there was that cheeky scamp and completely useless encyclopedia wise-ass Chris Howarth, who decided to vote for episodes from season 1 of The Avengers because he wanted them more than Doctor Who. Chris is like that. And finally, What about the venerable high brain of fandom, Jeremy Bentham? What's the curveball he's thrown that has given one vote to something that I didn't expect to get any votes and actually didn't even consider for the poll? Well, he's chosen The Dead Planet, episode 1 of the Daleks. Yep, he wants that back. No, not the one we already have, but he wants the first attempt at it, which was deemed unusable and had subtle differences. But it was decided not to broadcast it due to sound issues, and it had to be remounted some weeks later. A second pilot episode, if you like. But Jeremy wants to revive it. This dead planet has beautiful plumage, and he wants it no longer to have ceased to be. And so it is, strictly speaking, a missing episode. And Jeremy's pick, which must make those poor Galaxy 4 episodes feel even worse. Beaten by something we already have a version of, lads. For shame. It could have been worse. As Mark Trevor Owen muses, I wonder if any smarty pants has listed their most wanted wiped episode as the first part of The Awakening. He's referring there to the fact that that episode's master tape got a huge scratch on it and so is represented in the archive by a safety dub. But no, Mark, they didn't. My listeners may be pedantic, but I think you'll find they're not that pedantic. Though, that said, had I managed to ask another 112 of them, then I wouldn't put it past somebody to have suggested that, so just stop giving people ideas. Right. Next up, joint 89th place. We have 4 episodes with 1.8% of the votes each, and those episodes are The Daleks' Master Plan, Episode 9, Golden Death, and The Faceless Ones, Episode 2, The Faceless Ones, Episode 4, and The Faceless Ones, Episode 5. Now then, this is a turn-up, as The Daleks' Master Plan is one of the most desired stories, but this one has turned up in a stranger location than even the basement of a Mormon church. It's turned up near the bottom of this poll. Well, a huge number of people have chosen one or more instalments of this sprawling tale, which has much to recommend each part, what with its high turnover of characters, incidents and memorable moments. 0 voters that did so voted for Golden Death, which has been buried, and nobody much wants to dig it up. The only reason that this episode has its 2 votes is because 2 voters wanted Master Plan to be completed, and so this was swept up in the sum total. But as one of those people was David Tennant, it shouldn't feel too bad. But it's a stark illustration, isn't it, of the varied nature of this story, which does change in style and tone throughout its 3-month run. And it does have the scene in which the monk's TARDIS changes into all sorts of different things, like a tank and a caravan, but we can't be entirely sure, as we don't have 100% proof of it, so that'd be a nice mystery to solve, as well as being lots of fun. And it's double trouble for the chameleons, particularly episodes 2 and 4 of The Faceless Ones. Until pretty much the 11th hour of this competition, they had no votes. They were the voteless ones, and episode 5 had just 1 vote. But then, jetting in at the very last minute, Dr. Simon Exton had something to declare, and chose every episode still lost from this story in order to complete it, and thus save it from total ignominy, even though he'll have had no idea at the time that he was doing this. And then, amongst another latecomer, Russell Cook's luggage was every missing episode from this story, except for episode 5, bizarrely, and yet that had already been claimed from the carousel by someone else, which left them all, bar the final instalment, on equal votes, albeit those votes coming from different sources. I was about to say fascinating, but I just bored myself there, and I find really tedious stats quite interesting. Anyway, as we will see, a lot of people wanted to see more of the space pirates, and one of the reasons stated was because the extant episode has none of the titular villains in it. Yet we don't afford the same luxury to the poor old chameleons, who, despite having 2 episodes in the archive, episodes 1 and 3, don't show their faceless faces in either of them. And they're great monsters. And whilst Space Pirates fans mourn the absence of Domi Sigri from their viewing pool, no one seems to shed any tears for the plucky Nurse Pinto, another key element of the Faceless Ones not present in its existing instalments. Poor old Nurse Pinto, she's almost a surrogate companion. Other remarkable things that haven't been enough to sway you to these 3 episodes include, in episode 2, the last real hurrah of Michael Craze and Annika Wills, as they look like they're going to play a key role in the story before they are unceremoniously removed from it. This also therefore marked their last time in the studio, as their exit in episode 6 is on film. So this really is their final contribution to the show. Well, and then there's Sam Briggs's fantastic hat, which looks like a flying saucer from Plan 9 from outer space, and with it comes the Doctor Who debut of future Oscar nominee Pauline Collins. Episode 4 has the Doctor, Jamie and Sam in Goldfinger mode, with a gradually approaching laser beam set to zap them, the killing of the RAF pilot pursuing the plane, and we don't have a proper picture of him, and he's played by Michael Ladkin, who later became Colin Baker's agent, and the memorable cliffhanger in which the plane turns into a rocket ship and we see the Chameleon Station in space. Faceless Ones 5 has lots of antics on the alien ship, as well as plenty of Chameleon content, and is remarkable for having perhaps the classic series' only reference to toilets. Not by name, but Jamie rushes off to them to be ill during his ascent to the stars. He doesn't get miniaturized like the other passengers because, as a Scottish simpleton from olden times, he can't handle the turbulence inside those flying beasties, so he takes refuge in the facilities. So, what he's doing in there is, sorry to get into detail, likely to be throwing up rather than any activities more traditionally associated with the restroom, but even so, the lavatory is at least implied, making for a very rare event in the Whoniverse, where it becomes temporarily the Looniverse. And as we know, you're more likely to find a latrine in a Yeti-flavoured description from John Pertwee than in the series itself, so, let's take from these episodes what we can and where we can. As for the Faceless Ones, episode 6, that has yet to be flushed away, as it still has some advocates, so all is not yet lost for Chameleon fans, as we make our way up the charts to joint 81st place. Oh, it's crowded in these parts, as these 8 episodes have tied, accruing 3 votes each, around 2.7% of the total, and they are The Reign of Terror 5, A Bargain of Necessity, The Celestial Toymaker 2, The Hall of Dolls, The Celestial Toymaker 3, The Dancing Floor, The Underwater Menace Episode 1, The Ice Warriors 2, The Abominable Snowmen Episode 1, The Space Pirates Episode 1, and The Space Pirates Episode 4. So, just under 3% of voters want to complete The Reign of Terror. But Episode 4 was chosen by more people as a solo return, leaving poor old 5 out in the cold here as the least required episode from Season 1. Nobody who only chose one episode from The Reign of Terror chose this one. So if 5 ever wants to come back, it will need a chaperone. What we lose out on here is the conclusion of Barbara's flirtation with the dashing Leon Colbert, played by the war chief himself, Edward Brayshaw. Leon's undoing prompts a fabulous confrontation between Ian and Barbara, which is a smart exchange about perspectives in conflict and time travel. And more Brayshaw is never a bad thing. From the conciergerie to the nursery, a pair of episodes of The Celestial Toymaker also feature here, episodes 2 and 3, neither of them chosen individually, and both of them chosen by people who want the whole thing back in the archive. There's much to muse about here because whilst we have lots of gorgeous photos, including tons of the sets, we don't have any telesnaps, so how these episodes were realised leaves much to the imagination, and the uniqueness of the story has attracted a few curious voters. Episode 2 is of course notorious for using an offensive word. It's muttered in the background as a character recites a nursery rhyme, then in pretty common usage, and could fairly easily be removed from the soundtrack, I think. I note it here as a notable, if unfortunate, curio. More welcome will be the chance to see Carmen Silvera and Campbell Singer as the King and Queen of Hearts, and to see exactly how the deadly chairs work in this episode's lethal game of the week. Episode 3, The Hall of Dolls, has a dance sequence that we can only imagine, and, hey, it's an episode with Tutty Lemko's name on the closing credits, so that's definitely in its favour. Silvera and Singer, who aren't in the extant Episode 4, are back again and playing different characters, an enjoyable bespoke feature of this particular story. We also don't know how the credits were done at the end of these episodes, as the Radio Times billings aren't done in the usual way, and we don't have the graphics paperwork. And in this instant, Episode 4 doesn't really help. and I can't believe Benjamin Cook didn't vote for episode 3. His auntie is in it. Episode 1 of The Underwater Menace has done less well than its conclusion, though listener Richard Smith is keen to see it. The scene setting for this unusual story, he says. It also features some nice location filming, the Doctor's stovepipe hat, yay, and one of those moments. The Doctor signs his name Dr. W, another of the oblique suggestions that our main character is called Doctor Who that were rather popular in a portion of the Lloyd Davis script editor-producer era. Oh, and whilst Annika Wills didn't choose this episode, she did tell me that I'd have "You're not turning me into a fish," which is a memorable line from this episode, on my gravestone, if I were the sort of person to have one, which I'm not. Just goes to show how even the most off-kilter bits of Doctor Who can affect us in different ways. The presence of its second episode here means that The Ice Warriors becomes the first story to be out of the competition. It has no remaining instalments left to vote for, which, in terms of this part of the poll, makes it the least desired story to be discovered at this car boot sale, despite the efforts of its advocates. And on its own, The Ice Warriors 2 may seem like an odd choice, especially if you're not choosing 3 with it and so completing the story. But Big Finish's War Master, actor Jonathan Carley, articulates his desire for it, and it alone, well. The Ice Warriors are very physical creations, he says, and Bernard Bresslaw was cast for that very reason. Episode 2 is his spotlight episode to establish that, through his interplay with Victoria. By the time we get to episode 4, there's loads of them milling about, which really shifts the focus. But 3 votes is as special as The Ice Warriors gets in this poll. Fascinating. I remember when it was a missing story. The cast to die for, the iconic creatures, the glacial base under siege. They all made it so desired when I was a kid. So desired that I actually had a dream about it being returned. And I was heartbroken when I woke up and that hadn't happened. Eventually, though, that dream came partly true, and I was there at a Panopticon convention when the return of episodes 1, 4, 5 and 6 was announced to a packed hall. Oh, how we cheered! Today, though, the remaining instalments can expect far fewer caterwauls of joy should they turn up in a different cupboard. How fickle we are. The Abominable Snowmen underperformed in the whole story selection, and its lowest scoring instalment, its opening one, finds itself here on a par with that of the Space Pirates, which, considering that one is probably the most exposition-heavy 25 minutes in the history of Doctor Who and doesn't feature the regular cast until 19 minutes in, is something of a miracle, and probably not one the Yeti episode wants to contemplate, especially as its opening episode has a great build-up and some nighttime location work featuring Travers finding his dead colleague, played by Reg Whitehead, maybe, we don't know. Do we see his face? Probably not. The case of The Abominable Snowmen 1 is a weird one. In my first draft of this, completed 24 hours before I allowed an extra half-dozen votes in, it was at the bottom, in the Yeti No Mates category, scoring a big fat hairy 0. And yet 3 out of those final 6 entries chose it. Incredible. Its spirit must have gone on to the psychic plane to ask for help. Those who voted for The Abominable Snowmen generally tended to do it to soak up their remaining episodes and get to 17. So episode 1 was always the one to suffer if people only had 3 or 4 left in their tally. So definitely for a couple of voters, it would have been their 18th choice. But we're not at that kind of car boot sale. Like the Holy Ganta, it'll have to go missing. So yes, the Space Pirates show up again, and this time it's 2 episodes for the price of 1. The TARDIS Crew Light episode 1 was voted for by Gareth Bowley, who felt it could sit alongside episode 2 and bolster it, whereas Philip Marsh wants to see more of its model work. Episode 4 was chosen by New Zealand Uber-fan, who played a role in getting the Crusade episode 1 back to the BBC, Paul Scoons, and he says, "I doubt that finding a complete set of the Space Pirates will redeem its reputation, like the reception given to The Enemy of the World, but he nonetheless wants a little bit of it back, and he chose this bit, episode 4. The Space Pirates 1 and 4 also both feature actor Nick Zaran as Lieutenant Sorber, who is notable for 2 reasons. He is one of the rare actors of colour with a proper speaking role in 60s Doctor Who, and he's a character of whom we have no existing photographs. There are also no photographs of regular Ice Warrior actor Steve Peters as a space pirate guard either, so it'll be nice to see him. Similarly, Anthony Donovan's only Doctor Who appearance as a space guard in episode 1 is unknown to us photographically. So, these episodes 1 and 4 have a number of similar appeals, although only episode 4 has Troughton's Doctor messing about with his pocketed drawing pins and tuning fork. Delightful. Oh, and electrocuting a guard, possibly fatally. Slightly less delightful. Yeah, maybe we should brush that one under the space carpet. So, look, there's not a lot of love for those episodes, but there's something to be had in each and every one of them. So that's the good news. If even one of these lesser wanted episodes were to turn up, I don't think we'd be too disappointed. There's something to be had in each and every one of them. And it's only right that this podcast should be packaged in individual episodes. And so this is the end of this one. I hope it gets your vote, but just in case it doesn't, well, here's another illustrious member of the Whoniverse to describe his choices. It's only the Killer of the Moon, the instigator of the inversion of the Zygon invasion, and the writer whose missing episodes will be found at a car boot sale at the Pyramid at the End of the World. It's only acclaimed writer Peter Harness.
Hello, Toby. Peter Harness speaking. This is an extremely difficult task to be set, but I've approached it in this way, that we're fairly used to having more or less complete stories, such as the Invasion or the Ice Warriors or Web of Fear, and we get a really good impression of those, and we can enjoy them with gaps. And if we have a lot of material from a story, then surely AI is going to get good enough to be able to plug the gaps of one missing episode in not too very long before it takes all of our jobs and murders us in our beds. So I've tried to aim to get a few stories which I think are important and interesting and undiscovered to that position. So number one, of course, is Marco Polo. I think we can probably afford to lose a couple of episodes of that in the middle, maybe episode 3 and episode 5. So we get 5 episodes of Marco Polo, and then we've got season 1 more or less complete, and we've filled in that huge gap in everybody's brain that is called Marco Polo, the great mystery of season 1. Then it's very interesting to see what happens in the massacre. I think I'm less bothered about the Daleks master plan. I mean, we can see what happens in that, and there's a reconstruction of Mission to the Unknown. So I think the massacre, that just seems like such a weird and unusual story, and I'd love to see how they tell all the different bits of it. So let's take 3 episodes from the massacre. We can probably lose episode 2, I reckon, because episode 3 and 4 sound quite interesting to me. Then let's just take one episode 2 of the Mythmakers, because the Mythmakers is another completely closed book, and it would just be great to sample that. And then I'm afraid I'm binning the Smugglers, the Savages. I'm sorry, but there we go. And 10th Planet 4, because we know what happens in that, the interesting bits right at the very end. So the next thing we really need is Power of the Daleks. Let's keep as much of that as possible, maybe bin episode 3 or episode 4, but let's keep 5 episodes of Power. Then I'm afraid we've got to neglect the Highlanders, and I'm not going to put any more episodes into Evil of the Daleks. I'm terribly sorry. But in consolation for that, let's keep 3 episodes of the Macra Terror, maybe bin episode 3. And that, I think, takes us to 17 with 1, 2, 3, 4 stories which will more or less seem as though they're complete. Marco Polo, the Massacre, Power of the Daleks, and the Macra Terror, and a little treat from the Mythmakers. I don't think I've overthought this. Surely not as much as as the rest of us. This is definitely what's going to happen. Of course, these are the ones which will come back. I can confidently predict that. And good luck with your compilation of lists, which is obviously the important thing in this endeavour, and the most important thing for Doctor Who fans in general. Lots of love. Bye.
Thanks, Peter. Imagine what delights are in store in the remaining 80 episodes. Will the historicals hold out above the sci-fis? Which episode of Marco Polo will triumph in a very evenly matched 7-horse race? And which episode, after a very tight 3-way tussle between instalments from very different stories, will emerge on top, with just one vote in it between second and third place? Oh, and there'll be 3 more special guests too, of a calibre equal to those featured in this one. How exciting! That's next time. Until then, there will always be this episode of Indefinable Magic. Goodbye. Thanks so much for listening to Indefinable Magic, and this episode, Fantasy Film Cans, which was written and performed by me, Toby Hadoke, with special guest contributions from David Tennant, Nicholas Pegg and Peter Harness, Fraser Hines, Peter Purvis and Annika Wills. I'm grateful to them for giving me their time and lending me their voices, and to everyone who contributed to the poll, including many members of my Patreon page, which you can find at patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. The music for Indefinable Magic has been specially composed by Dominic Glynn, and the artwork is by Dylan Patterson. Those who answered the survey included Joel Ahrens, David Bickerstaff, Richard Bignell, Gareth Bowley, Tom Burgess, Tom Byatt, Alex Gafajoglu, Johnny Camden, Jonathan Carley, Anthony Carroll, Dara Carville, Phil Chapman, Ian Clark, Benjamin Cook, Paul Cornell, Oliver Crocker of the Bill Podcast, Manu Das, Jason Davis, Jonathan Evans, Joe Ford, Matt Foy, Johnny, David Gillespie Pratt, Paul Goodrich, James Goss, John Green, Simon Guerrier, Simon Harries, Ben Jolly, Nick Jocelyn Mellish, Christopher Joyce, Jess Jurgovic, James Kersey, Rick King Byatt, Paul Kirkley, Anthony Lamb, James Lark, Joe Llewellyn, Andrew Liddell, Andrew Llewellyn, Steve Manfred, Philip Marsh, Richard Marson, Pete McTighe, Christopher Meredith, Keith Miller, Ewan Morris, Jonathan Morris, Patrick Mulkern, Paul Murphy, Andy Murray, and more, who I'll mention next time. I'm grateful to each and every one of them. Thanks, guys. And I'll plug it again because that's how they are funded. I am on Patreon, patreon.com/Toby Hadoke, where for as little as £3 a month, you can get advance releases of my podcasts. Not this one, because people gave me their time for free, so it seems inappropriate for me to make money out of it being an exclusive or anything like that. So an early edit has gone out on my Patreon, as much to canvass opinion as to which bits I should cut. But generally, the podcasts go out months in advance on Patreon before they are released into the wild. And you also get bonus material, monthly AMAs, a special podcast all of your own called Far Too Much Information, and lots of other goodies, including behind-the-scenes footage from my Blu-ray and DVD antics. So you can go there, patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. It's the way we self-employed creators are funded these days, and I'm very grateful to everybody who is there. It's a lovely community. But if you can't or don't want to do that, don't fancy that, that's absolutely fine. There is an option to donate every now and again if you would prefer to do that. That's Ko-fi, ko-fi.com/Toby Hadoke. It's like bunging a couple of quid into a tip jar, or I think they dress it up, don't they? It's like buying me a coffee. Go on, buy me a coffee, but it won't lead to anything. I'm sorry. I don't find coffee an aphrodisiac, but I am grateful. And if you can't make a financial contribution, and that is totally understandable in these trying times, I'd be grateful for something that costs you nothing but a little bit of your time. And that is to like, to subscribe, to thumbs up, to give 5 stars and a few lines of review to these podcasts wherever you may find them. You can find me all over social media, at Blue Sky, at Twitter, at Instagram, at YouTube. Please like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. I'm trying to get that a bit more functional than my incompetence currently does. And I have a Facebook page too. So do my comedy club, Excess Malarkey, which is also on Blue Sky and on Instagram. Oh yeah, I'm on Instagram at Toby.Hadoke. I'm everywhere, really, apart from OnlyFans and TikTok, because I don't think the world is ready for either of those things. That's it. That's too long anyway, so I'm not doing any more. Post credit sequence next week. The Macra Terror. There we go. That was my impression of one print of the Moonbase episode 4. Yeah, go away. I mean, thanks, but yeah, seriously. So good. I recorded this when the clocks went back, so I got an extra hour in which to do it. But I'm still knackered. Bye.